forgive me if this is a little bit deeper into the valuation process than many people are comfortable with, but this is a really important issue. Really important issue with valuations in the context of a divorce. And the question to be answered is how much of the business is deemed to be personal goodwill. Okay? Now, Mr. Morrison will tell you that sometimes in a divorce-related valuation, the value of the overall business may actually be the second most important piece of information that's at stake. The percentage of the value of the business that's due to personal goodwill is sometimes much more important. Personal goodwill, I'll get into the definitions in a minute, but generally speaking, it's the portion of the value of the business that's directly attributable to the business owner, right? It's important to find that out because personal goodwill is not divisible. So if your business is worth $5 million, but personal goodwill is $500,000, then the divisible value is $4.5 million. If it's $5 million and personal goodwill is $4.5 million, then the divisible value is $500,000. For most instances in a divorce, generally, let's say there are two valuation specialists. Generally, the value of the business that's determined is within a certain range, 10, 15%, right? One expert may be at 5.3, the other may be at 4.7. But the adjustment to get from total value of the business to the divisible value of the business, taking into account personal goodwill, is one of the most contentious, and my experience has been one of the areas that is most susceptible to challenge. Okay, so let's just go through a little bit of this. Most businesses have two types of value: tangible, which is the net asset value, and intangible. Tangible meaning you look at the balance sheet, there are $300,000 worth of assets, $150,000 worth of liabilities, so the net asset value, the tangible asset value, will be $150,000. Most businesses have value above that tangible value, and the portion of that value that's above the tangible value is goodwill. Okay? And then goodwill is further divided into enterprise goodwill, which is divisible, that's specific to the business, and personal goodwill or professional goodwill specific to the individual business owner. Okay? Why is it important to know? Forgive me if I just said this. In most instances, courts treat personal goodwill as being non-divisible. Okay? The value of an interest to be divided in a divorce is generally net of personal goodwill. And the valuation specialist needs to apportion a percentage of personal goodwill to total goodwill, and the corresponding value of personal goodwill is subtracted from the total in order to determine what's divisible. What are the difficulties? By nature, it's subjective. I can say, well, it's Amy Adler's massage therapy, and Amy knows what she's doing, and she's really good, and if she leaves, clients will follow her to her next business opportunity. So I think that equates to 80% personal goodwill.
Why did you call it massage? My real business works that way.
I was wondering the same
I
thing.
call it massage because an actual element you'll see in this presentation, an actual element in determining personal goodwill is the degree of physical touch between you and the client. Right? So if I am a massage therapy guy, I'm on my knees and kneading and doing whatever massage therapy is, right? That has actual, it's a connection to the goodwill that is in the business, that's in the individual. If I just have a relationship with you where we're sitting across the table and I'm explaining to you about valuations, there is personal goodwill, but it's not as strong as if I'm physically touching you. That's why I said massage therapy. Okay? There can be very wild swings in assessment of value depending on the methodology. And it is one, as I said this earlier, one of the areas that's most subject to scrutiny. So that little loose example I just said, because of these 4 or 5 factors, my conclusion is 80% personal goodwill. You could use that exact same reasoning and say 60% or 40%. The problem is there is no specific line to be drawn, excuse me, between a series of declarative statements and a specific percentage. And as you can tell, especially if it's a big enough business, on a $10 million business, 10 percentage points one way or the other will make a tremendous difference in terms of what the divisible value ends up being.
Brian, I have a question.
Yes.
There's no case law at all, like defining, okay, if it's a massage studio, it's this, or if it was a hair salon, it's this, or if it's, by different, is there any case law at all that gives you some?
So first of all, with regard to case law, you'd probably have to ask this gentleman. But businesses are not cookie cutter. So it's not that if there is a massage therapist studio, it's going to be run a specific way, and that translates to 85% personal goodwill. A good example would be if there is, and I had this happen in a valuation last year. I did a massage studio, but it was part of a national franchise. It's part of a national franchise, then many of those elements that would ordinarily go into the personal goodwill column don't apply, because I just spent a couple $1 million on a massage therapist studio. There's infrastructure that goes with it. There's a big series of booklets that tells me how to unlock the safe, tells me how to conduct the A1 massage or whatever it's
The
qualified
purpose of
as.
buying into a franchise is because
You're buying
paying
into
the
a
bill
franchise
for the
that's already
franchise,
existing,
yeah.
so you're probably not the one actually doing the service. So there's so many differences with regard to each businesses that you sort of have to analyze each one on its own, as opposed to sort of saying, if it's this business, then it translates to that much personal goodwill. Okay, so solution is, and this gets kind of numbersy, so forgive me, the numbers-oriented people are wagging their tails there.
Sorry.
The multi-attribute utility model. It's kind of a long phrase, but I'll tell you what exactly it does. It's a method of scoring the answers to several questions. Half of them are designed to find personal goodwill, the other half are designed to find enterprise goodwill. The answers are scored on a scale of 1 to 10 on two different scales. One scale is called the importance utility. How important is it in the context of this analysis? And then the existence utility. Does it exist in this analysis? Okay? When you do this, it allows you to get specifically to a percentage. You score each of the questions, and then the numbers relating to each question are multiplied by each other in order to determine the total score for that question. Then you calculate the following. Then you have a really messy numbers exercise, but it makes sense afterwards. Total personal goodwill score, total enterprise goodwill score, total goodwill score, and then this will make sense in a minute, I promise. The percentage of personal goodwill is then determined by dividing the personal goodwill score by the total goodwill score. Okay? That is much more systematic. It's much more objective. I can tell you from the perspective of somebody who's defended this in court multiple times, it is much more difficult to challenge an analysis like this as opposed to the guy who just said 80%. Okay? Advantages, you get objectivity. It provides a definite pathway from a set of declarative statements specifically to a corresponding percentage of personal goodwill. I'll give you a couple of hypotheticals, and hopefully this will make sense. John Smith Dentistry, okay? One owner, 100% interest. The value of the dentistry is $5 million, okay? The net asset value, meaning on the balance sheet, the assets minus the liabilities, is $500,000. These are the questions that are designed to find personal goodwill. So what is the ability, skill, and judgment of the individual? What are their work habits? What is their age and health? Do they have a good personal reputation? Do they have personal staff? In other words, do people work at the business because of that person? Is it a personalized name, John Smith Dentistry? Marketing and branding, is that the marketing efforts directly toward the individual? Here's what we talked about earlier. Closeness of contact, physical contact between the person, the client and the owner. And is the service of an important personal nature? And so for each of these questions, I have to score them on the first scale of the importance utility, and the next scale, existence utility. Okay? I'm not going to go through every single score, but you get the idea. So on a scale of 1 to 10 for each one of those, yes,
But
correct.
doesn't that just that puts subjectivity right back into it?
Yeah.
There is no way to remove
I know,
subjectivity
right,
at
yeah.
all. None whatsoever.
Right.
Otherwise
But
you would need to
in the
hire-
context of being subjective, you can still say, all right, based on an analysis that is still subjective, here's my attempt to make it objective, and here's my attempt to get from a series of sort of generic object or declarative statements to a specific percentage of personal goodwill. And so for each one of these, like this is 8, 8, 8, 8, and so on, right? I have a math problem. That number multiplied by that number gives me that number. I do all of that, and total at the bottom, that gives me 712 points. These questions are designed to find enterprise goodwill. For dentistry, it's probably not surprising that each of these is relatively low. Okay? And so, good afternoon. And so with those numbers being relatively low, your total enterprise goodwill number is much lower than personal goodwill, which means that my total multiplicative utility, 806, personal goodwill, 88%. Once again, at the risk of repeating myself, it does not mean that you've removed all subjectivity. It just means that it takes you directly from an environment where you're simply guessing and throwing up a number that can be challenged to an objective way of saying, here's how I calculated this. Even though I still have and will always have a subjective exercise, here's my attempt to put objectivity into it, and here's my attempt to translate the series of sort of in the clouds subjective declarative statements to something that is specific.
Maybe it's a way of thinking about it is you're codifying the subjectivity, right? Because if you are coming up with these numbers
Right.
for every business,
Right.
you're coming at it from the same degree of subjectivity,
Correct.
but bringing it to a place where so you can't remove the subjectivity, but what you're doing is codifying it in a way.
And so
To
I'll get back to this.
minimize the impact of it on the
Always have
final
a-
number.
Yes. And so when I write my reports and I'm
I'm
describing
not a
this,
numbers person, but I can.
so when I write my reports and I'm describing this piece of it for each of the numbers, at least not every single one, but for the majority of them, I'll go through and say, based on my observation, it appears that John Smith has a direct relationship with his clients. On a scale of 1 to 10, I think that's worthy of an 8. Or in interviewing the employee who's been here for 10 years, she says if John Smith leaves, she's going somewhere else. So that translates to 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, whatever it ends up being. You're moving it from the realm of just, without repeating myself too much, you're moving it from the realm of I sort of pie in the sky type stuff into something much more specific. Yes, sure.
I guess this is kind of an observation.
Uh-huh.
Since this isn't mandated by your industry to use this,
Right,
correct?
correct.
And would somebody else not do it just because they think that they can make it in the best interest of their client, but then they go to court and then they're screwed?
That is a good question.
Because I would think that someone would want to have it codified in this way.
It's gotta be
Just-
defensible.
The natural advantage is removal of subjectivity. I had 2 different valuations, each with me on one side and a specific person on the other side. If I said that person's name, you know it immediately. The first valuation, I did this and he didn't. A month later, we do another valuation. He also does something exactly like this. The advantage is obvious.
did you create this?
I did not create
Okay,
it.
I thought.
I tweaked it in a number of ways to fit my purposes. I customized some of the questions. It's the multi-attribute utility model is sort of a global approach to solving specific
How new
questions.
is that, Brian?
On you?
Yeah.
Well, I've been doing this for 14 years now. I've used it the entire time that I've been using it. Have you never seen anything like
No,
this?
I haven't.
Really?
Uh-uh.
So you just see where they say 80%.
You've been working with
A,
the wrong
a
guy.
lot of the same.
Yeah.
Thank you. A lot of the same criteria, but I've not seen it scored like that.
I remember seeing something along these lines in college, like in graduate school. So it's this type of model has
Right.
been around a long time.
Exactly.
But this level of specificity and this beauty of calculation.
Oh, beauty. I love that word. Okay,
That's new.
I don't want to drag this out much longer. Let's just go through what this looks like. So the value of the business, $5 million. Net asset value, $500,000 means that the total goodwill, which is enterprise and personal, is $4.5 million. Personal goodwill, 88.34. The value of personal goodwill, which is non-divisible, is subtracted from $5 million, means that of this business, only 1.024 million is divisible. Even though the total value of the business is
Mrs.
$5
Smith
million.
is pissed.
Yes, she is.
My dreams as a
Or
stay-at-home
Mr.
dad are
Smith.
done.
Oh, yeah.
Done.
Or the other Mr. Smith, you're right.
I will not be hiring Brian if I do that.
Another real quick example in reverse, or meaning a different type of business.
Hey Brian,
Norm?
real quick, on
Yes, sir.
that last one,
Mhm.
do you do these valuations just for like somebody terminating a marriage, or do you do these if somebody wants to buy John Smith Dentistry?
What an absolutely brilliant question.
You're welcome.
Exact same thing would apply. So, and you. So if I'm doing a valuation in the context of somebody wanting to offer an interest of their business to somebody else, the very first thing that I say is understand you sell the business or you sell your piece of the business for whatever you want to because it is your business. My analysis will say, taking into account the adjustments for personal goodwill, what that piece of business is worth. I'll give you one other piece of information. If I'm ostensibly, you'd be selling a minority interest in the business, right? So you'd be selling a 25% interest. I'd also say you're also selling a minority interest, so under the fair market value standard. After I determine the value of the business net of personal goodwill, I'll still have to discount it because it's a minority interest, discount it for lack of control and discount it for lack of marketability. So you can sell it for whatever you want to sell it for. If my value says that a 25% interest is worth $50,000 and you want to sell it for $5 million, that's up to you. Just understand from a valuation standpoint what each of these theories applied means to the value of your business. And if the purchase or the purchaser of that business comes to you later on and says, wait a minute, you sold this to me for $5 million, but I applied these discounts should have applied and it really should have only been worth, $2 million, then you don't have a defense to that. At the same time, it is your business, you can sell it for whatever you want to, but per valuation standards, these are things that would apply.
That brings up a bigger picture point that I'm not sure everybody here is clear on about how goodwill is calculated in general, right? It's the difference between the market value of the business and the net asset value, right?
Correct.
So you're determining what the overall market value sale value of the business
Correct.
would be, and then you subtract out of it the net asset value to get what's left, which is the intangible asset of goodwill.
Correct.
So that's where the 4.5 million in this case comes from, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, I know we don't have a lot of time. Let me just go through one more quick example. Different business, North Austin Coffee Shop, so the name of the person is not in the name of the business. It's a coffee shop, so there's no personal touch, at least you wouldn't think. One owner, 100% interest, same valuation, same net asset value,
How
right?
do you figure out, the
Sure.
net asset value?
Just on the balance sheet,
Okay,
QuickBooks.
$100,000, yeah. So you print a balance sheet, $100,000 in assets, maybe a 50 in cash, 25 in receivables, and 25 in furniture. So that's 100,000 in assets, and then liabilities, you have payables, and just the difference between those two is your net asset value. Okay. I won't go through all of this again. With a coffee shop, these numbers will be much lower. Okay. Which means a total personal goodwill here is 89. Enterprise goodwill issues are going to be much, much higher. 505, which means that my personal goodwill is about 15%. Okay? So on the same valuation, meaning both businesses are valued exactly at the same number, all of this stays the same, but with personal goodwill only 14.98, that gives me 674 of personal goodwill, meaning that that's what gets divided. Needless to
Stay home
say,
dad for a coffee shop owner has a $5 million coffee
That's way
shop.
more lucrative.
Well, the idea here is my future wife, her name will not be in the title. And it's just gonna be a bland, there's be no family name on it. You know, that's how we're gonna do this. I'm strategizing.
Or make it
Put your name on it.
Yeah.
There you go.
so this just, I think, emphasizes the point I made earlier. The value of the business itself, the values of the businesses can be, and in most instances are relatively close. If you have two different experts and you ask them to value the same business, there's a certain percentage between, maybe I'd say 10 to 15% that you get those two numbers. The biggest difference is going to be with these adjustments for personal goodwill.
So you're applying this to a business that, like a lot of businesses are valued on multiples of revenue or multiples of earnings, so that's just the valuation, and then you're applying this to determine the piece of the valuation that would be at risk with the owner gone.
I would use the term, in a way that's what you're calculating. Now, let me say this, you just started talking about the valuation where you apply multiples. Multiples are probably the worst thing that you can go into court with in terms of a valuation. Because a multiple, if I come up with a multiple of 0.5 for revenue, that multiple of 0.5 is compiled or comprised of several different data points. You may have had to go through maybe 300 business transactions and they average 0.5. On that 0.5 average, there will be some that are 0.05
Sure.
and there will be some that are 18. So who is to say that this specific business is not more like the business that is 0.05 or the business that's 18? So the analogy I always use is that those market-based approaches, when you apply multiples, that gets you in the neighborhood. But what gets you to the specific number that you need is the income-based models, where I really don't want to turn this into a valuation class.
Oh, I knew.
But that's what I'm saying is valuation is determined independent of all the goodwill, and so
Right.
you come up with a valuation, and I apologize that I was late. So
No, not at all.
But you're coming up with a valuation based on whatever financial model you're
Correct.
using.
Yes.
And then the goodwill, you're carving the goodwill out from that.
Exactly.
It's not additive or,
No.
You're exactly right.
Right.
That's the
Exactly
top
right.
line.
Right.
So
The
you
market
figure
value
out the
comes
top
first.
line first.
Right.
Then take
Yeah.
out the net assets, the rest is the intangible goodwill
Right.
that they're dividing between personal and.
Right.
And doesn't it make you want to just go ahead and get a divorce just to see this?
Just want to see how this works. Okay, any other questions?
divorce the right
I have an off-the-wall question. Because
Okay.
I worked with 2 vets this year. So
Okay.
you said hands-on. What if it's not people?
What a great question. That is a really good question. My inclination would be it's somewhere between a doctor and a coffee shop. So, yes, you have specialized training. There is certainly, you have to have empathy, etc. But it's not going to be the same as, doing a massage that Amy would do, right? So, I would say
I'm
it would be
massaging their numbers.
different kind of massage. I would probably argue, and I'd have to look into it in detail, obviously, but I would argue that it would not be as heavy. It wouldn't be 80% goodwill, but it also wouldn't be 20%, I wouldn't think.
Thank you.
What a great question.
That is a fun question.
I just took my dog to the vet the other day.
I had
so it
2
was
this
relevant.
year.
Married vets?
No.
Oh, okay.
So,
Well, one.
any other questions
Yeah,
before I wrap?
I mean, this is just like a situation, but have you run into where the business is valued at one piece in 1 year, but then you get a bad year like this year,
Mhm.
and is the business looked at now completely different value because of rates rising and private investments going down and all that?
Hey,
So a couple of things. That's why the date, effective date of the valuation is so
Matters.
important.
Okay.
Because you start at the valuation date. But when I'm doing a valuation, this probably speaks to what you're talking about, okay? I'm not looking at, I look at multiples to establish a data point. But a very important part of the puzzle is the income-based valuation, where I'm looking to project forward. And so if I'm doing a valuation, I'm sitting here on June 30th of this year, I'm thinking, okay, inflation is absolutely high. So when I'm projecting forward 5 years, my projections for inflation for 2023, 4 and 5 are probably going to be 8%, 6%, 4%. I'm actually building a financial model that takes into account everything that I can think of that would be relevant. I'm going into, okay, what is the growth path that the business was on before? You know, maybe it was on a consistent, maybe 8% growth path, dipped in 20 because of COVID, but now it's on the way back up. I factor all of that in. I'm doing research that says, what is this industry doing? I'm doing research to say, what is the overall economy doing? And so when I come up with a projection, the projection will take into account all of those things. And, you know, does it mean that I know the future? No, it doesn't. But it means that it's as intelligent a guess as possible. And it takes into account everything that I know at the time that I'm doing the valuation. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
I'll save the rest.
she wants to take your class.
I asked for this topic.
No, it's very interesting.
It really is.
So you would say, I'm sorry, I guess I do have a question.
Yeah.
You would say if someone's going through a divorce, you want to make sure that they're hiring someone who uses this type of analysis for personal goodwill.
I would say, well, it depends.
Which side you're on?
I was about to say, which side you're on now. I'm not going to pick a side. Obviously, I'm not allowed to pick a side. But if I'm doing it, I'm going to go through this analysis.
Right.
And where the chips fall, they fall.
Right.
Now, understand that this is a double-edged sword. If I go through this process and this coffee shop is valued at $5 million, the divisible value is 4.3, the spouse of this owner is going to be really, really happy. But at the same time, the owner himself or herself is going to be really happy if they need to sell this coffee shop. Because there's a very small reduction in personal goodwill, because most of the value is enterprise goodwill and actual tangible asset value, which is all obviously saleable. Okay.
That's interesting. It actually works to both of their advantages.
In that instance,
Yeah.
yes. I've actually had a client who came to me 1 year because they were buying out their business partner, and then the second year because they were divorcing. Same business, valued twice within like a year and a half or something. It's kind of interesting.
Jeez.
Okay, anything else?
Brian's done.
Look, if you let me, I'll talk for the next 2 hours. I love this stuff.
Yeah.
I recognize people, you know.
Okay, I do have one question.
What's the question?
So, and I'm wondering, maybe it comes after the valuation and it's a negotiation, but let's go back to, if we go back to the dentistry,
Mhm.
the dentist office, what if the wife actually set up all of their back office systems? And way back when it first got started, the wife put all of her time and energy into getting it all set up and organized and all
Did
of
she get
that.
paid for that?
No,
A lot of
probably
times
not.
they
It was
don't.
probably just, you know, making the business
A different
better.
kind of
So
goodwill.
that exact thing happened to me when I was helping my ex-husband. Both of them start their businesses when I did their accounting to get it set up.
Yeah.
And I was able to get paid for my time, but I did not have a stake in the business itself.
You got paid for your time as part of the divorce settlement? Okay.
But it was their separate property because the businesses were started before we got married, so.
Oh, okay.
It essentially becomes a point of negotiation.
Yeah, okay.
So if you want to say to Greg, hey Greg, look, from a valuation standpoint, that information is cute, but it has no relevance on what I'm doing here.
Mhm.
But if you want to take it and, you know, maybe concede on a couple of other points because, yeah, there's some goodwill in the generic sense that accrues to the person who was helping set up things in the first place, that's certainly something that you could do, but it's not, strictly speaking, a valuation issue.
It makes me think that this group could write an ebook on prenups.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure if we put our heads to it, we really could.
All the things to think about.
How much are we charging for it?
What's our minimum?
Yeah, what are we charging here?
Right.
Hey.
Okay,
That was awesome, Brian. Thank you.
thank you, everybody.